Thank you so much. It's a really great pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Kathleen for inviting me here, and I've had the great pleasure to be with Professor Reichman, to hear Professor Gaynor, Moshe Payadon, and I look forward to hearing the Attorney General later this afternoon. This is a special moment for me, as you can imagine. Yesterday, June 6th, was the 47th anniversary of the death of my father, Robert Kennedy, that you just mentioned. I'm going to speak later in the conference more about my father and his love of Israel, but I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about it this afternoon. His love and respect for Israel was born right here alongside the birth of the Jewish state. After graduating from college, he came to Israel at the age of 23 to cover the War of Independence as a reporter for the Boston Post. He was immediately struck by the courage of the Jewish freedom fighters. He wrote, "The Jews who have been strong enough to get to Palestine are tough. They are limited in alternatives, for there is no country or group of countries that even considers taking in the Jews. They can go into the Mediterranean Sea and get drowned, or they can fight and perhaps get killed. They will fight, and they will fight with unparalleled courage. This is their greatest and last chance. The eyes of the world are upon them, and there can be no turning back." My father saw in Israel, as he put it, a truly great modern example of the birth of a nation in dignity and self-respect. He saw a people's determination not only to survive, but to repair a world which he knew, perhaps more intimately than anyone ever in the history of the world, was horribly, horribly broken. My father's visit in 1948 cemented his support for Israel. He was instrumental in building the foundations of friendship during President Kennedy's administration. And he championed peace. And as he championed peace, he was also realistic about the need to build Israel's defense forces. As a senator and a candidate for president, he spoke out in favor of the first major U.S. arms sale to Israel in the form of 50 Phantom jets. And due to that stance, he lost his life. So I stand here today in solidarity with those of you who have lost family and friends in the fight for Israel. We are joined by ties of history, of kinship, of love that touch millions of citizens in both our nations and in this room today. This is a challenging time for Israel, but Israel has known danger and challenges before. I remember January 2001, during the Second Intifada. The historic Israeli sites that often bustled with tourists eager to see where Abraham lived and Jesus walked were empty and silent as many canceled their trips, anxious for their safety. I know because I was here in 2001 with my husband and my daughters for a 2-week visit. We climbed Masada, saw the Golan Heights, walked the streets of Nazareth. Friendships formed in difficult times endure, and so I'm glad to be with you here today. No two nations have welcomed more immigrants to their shores than our two nations. And in the United States, we have welcomed Israelis with open arms. We are both nations of refugees. We are both the children of the dispossessed. And we don't forget our past. In Israel, we cannot forget that so many of your founders were survivors of the Holocaust. We are also nations that create a vibrant future, despite, or perhaps because of, the pains of our past. It's just not the United States that boasts its technological stars such as Google and Apple and Facebook. Israel is the startup nation, where men and women with ideas... Oh, that's good. I don't know if Yossi Vardi is in the audience, but he seems to be everywhere that we talk about the startup nation. With women with ideas, technical know-how, brains and brilliance, envision, develop, and create technologies that will cure disease, desalinate water, and save energy. Franklin Roosevelt said, "Lives of nations are determined not by the count of years, but the lifetime of a human spirit. The life of man is 80 years and 10, a little more, a little less. But the life of a nation is the fullness of its will to live. No nation has shown a greater will to live than Israel." That will continues to be tested today. Along with many Americans, I share Israel's righteous fear of a rising tide of anti-Semitism and the increasing test of global terrorism. I would have thought that the Holocaust would for all time inoculate Europe against a recurrence of the deadly virus of anti-Semitism. I was wrong. Despite all the strides of post-war era Europe, that virus was never completely cured, and it has now come roaring back. Last year, in the 8 countries in which over 90% of the European Jews live, 25% of the Jews have been victims of an attack or harassment, 1 in 4. 75% said that anti-Semitism has grown worse over the last 5 years. In France, where Jews account for less than 1% of the population, they were victims of 40% of the reported attacks based on religion, race, or ethnicity. We in the United States have our own problems. On college campuses, students have had their fitness for student government called into question simply because they're Jews. And in 2013, more than half of all the religious hate crimes targeted Jewish Americans. In the State of the Union address in January, President Obama condemned the deplorable anti-Semitism that has resurfaced in certain parts of the world. He said, anti-Semitic attacks pose a threat that extends beyond the Jewish community. They also threaten the values we hold dear, pluralism, diversity, and the freedom of religion and expression. Courage is required now as anti-Semitism again rears its ugly head. This scourge, whether in its murderous or its less violent forms, requires a collective commitment and determination. We cannot be passive. There is an equally insidious threat, terrorism, that we also must speak out against, both in its capacity to wreak havoc and its inability to seduce and recruit militants. I hardly need to tell this audience about the challenge of terrorism. You have experienced death from your founding days, and it still goes on. The blasts from Gaza, the guns from Lebanon and Syria, buses that may be blown up. And the horror is shared worldwide. The Taliban has undertaken a campaign of violence against the Pakistani people. In Somalia, al-Shabaab terrorists have launched attacks from East Africa. In Nigeria and neighboring countries, Boko Haram kills and kidnaps men, women, and children. ISIL is terrorizing the people of Syria and Iraq and engaging in unspeakable cruelty. The first line of defense against terrorism is a smart, strong military, and the Israeli-American partnership is testimony to that bedrock understanding. If the people of Israel feel themselves alone, it is a good reminder that no American administration has been more supportive of Israel in its military support and defense cooperation than this one under President Obama. The second front in the struggle against terrorism has to be the battle of ideas, to confront the warped ideology and the bedazzling apocalyptic lies that energize and seduce young converts to the cause. Terrorism is insidious. Even when ISIL is not directing murder and mayhem, it is inspiring death and destruction by seducing the young to choose death over life. Both terrorism and anti-Semitism weaken the rule of law, breed fear of the other, and degrade the dignity of every human being. Anywhere Israel is subject to delegitimization or an unfair criticism, you can count on Americans and Israel to work together to fight back. I commit to that, and I know the American people do as well. As I think about the situation in Israel right now, I'm reminded of a story by Martin Buber, in which the Majid of Mezrich described how he learned the secret of love by overhearing the conversation of two peasants. One turned to the other and said, "Do you love me?" And the second replied, "Of course I do. We've been friends for years." The first peasant said, "What is it that is hurting me now?" The second peasant said, "How can I know if you don't tell me?" And the first answered, "How can you say you love me if you don't know what causes me pain?" I don't pretend to know the depth of the pain that you feel here in Israel. But as I and many in this room can attest, the sorrow from a single death is a deep and lasting wound, with repercussions across time and generations. Multiplied twice, 3 times, or 100, the pain and destruction and opportunities for more bitterness, the desire for revenge only worsens. Every moment presents a question: will I live or die? Will someone I know live or die? And yet you go on working, raising families, arguing about politics. I suspect that the pain you feel is deepened not only by the loss of life, but by the growing isolation in the family of nations. Israel is clearly held to a double standard at times. When you withdrew from Lebanon, you got Hezbollah. When Israel allowed votes in Gaza, you got tunnels and rockets. And you want to make sure you don't get the same in the West Bank. 3 wars in 6 years. With ISIS in Syria, the threats seem never-ending. While it is true, as Martin Buber says, that friendship requires us to know each other's pain, friendship also requires us to see the best in our friends, asking us that they live up to the high hopes that we harbor for them. I feel a deep, deep bond with the people of Israel, born both from family ties, shared values, and many friendships. I ask as your friend that you don't give up on peace. Yes, the PLO has been recalcitrant and difficult. Yes, you are surrounded by many who wish you harm. But a negotiated settlement is necessary to end the generations-long battle and to end the bloodshed. We need a two-state solution, and we need to trust that the building of settlements will stop. Terrorism has created too many widows, orphans, and rivers of tears. So while we may cry, we also must act. First, with a strong defense, but also with a moral courage unique to our two countries. It is necessary to address the grievances, both economic and political, that terrorists exploit. When a child does not have a chance at a good education or a job to engage in lawful activity which gives him or her pride in their endeavors, in their family and their faith, they are more susceptible to the siren song of jihad and eternal life through martyrdom. I wish that a conference in Israel could focus on the exciting new startups, what lessons the surrounding nations could take from Israel's extraordinary ability to create this vibrant, democratic nation. Instead, we must focus on threats. As my father said, life is perilous indeed, but man is not made for safe havens. The obstacles today may seem intractable, but history teaches us that there's nothing on earth that will not yield to patient application of human ingenuity, fortitude, and above all, moral courage. So let us apply these values for peace, for freedom, for justice. We cannot curse our fate, but judge ourselves on the way we stay true to the tenets that made our nations unique in history. Our mutual commitment to democracy, to liberty, to justice. And as those who have gathered here know only too well, in a world which freedom still struggles, where bigotry endures, Israel and America lead in the safeguarding of the rights of our own citizens to speak, associate, and worship freely in open and tolerant societies. You will focus on threats, but you will do well and you will succeed. God bless you.